Hello, and welcome back to Work Experience Discover, the IAESTE A.s.b.l podcast. In this episode, we have our president with us. Thomas got re-elected during the Annual Conference 2022 in Vienna for another 2 years as the president of the association. And in this episode, compared to 1 year ago, we will discuss strategy. Where does he think we have to develop as an association? What needs to change, and what are the biggest challenges in the next coming years of his presidency? And of course, in the end, we will also talk about Thomas himself, about his leadership style. So this episode, although it's a little bit longer than usual, please enjoy it and get to know the president and what his plans are for the next 2 years. Hope you enjoy, and see you also in the next one. Thanks. About 1 month after the Annual Conference 2022 in Vienna, which was the first one organized by IAESTE A.s.b.l, of course, with the help of IAESTE Austria, what are your learnings, or what are the learnings of IAESTE A.s.b.l looking back now, 1 month later, to the conference?
I think the major learning for all of us is, and I think that's important to mention, maybe for people who don't know in which format the conference was arranged. It was a hybrid conference. I believe if it would have been a pure online conference or a pure on-site physical conference, the learnings would be totally different than with the hybrid conference. So as it was a hybrid conference, I think the major learning we all take out of this is basically it's 2 conferences. And that is definitely something what I would not say we totally underestimated, but definitely for the future needs a little bit of adapted setting in terms of resources from our side, as well as to a certain extent from the hosting country. I think something what we also should not forget is yes, IAESTE A.s.b.l, or the team of IAESTE A.s.b.l is having quite some experience in terms of organizing the conference or being involved in the organization of the conference, while for the hosting country, usually it's not saying once in a lifetime experience, but usually like once in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, something like this. But irrespective of this, typically the people on the ground from the hosting country have been on annual conferences before. The conference the year before, 2 years before, whether because they were involved in the exchange team, they were national secretaries, or just because they knew they would host the conference and would simply send 1, 2, 3 additional people to the event itself. That happened a year in advance. Yeah. With the current setting, a very small number of people who have been involved as volunteers on the ground during the conference week have ever been at an annual conference. And in addition to this, for most of them, it was the first physical or the first international physical IAESTE meeting in the entire IAESTE career, because they joined IAESTE right before the pandemic or even during the pandemic. And I think that added definitely an additional layer of complexity, simply because, you are overwhelmed with the entire situation. But I think the approach in let's say, having the responsibility, the financial risk, and the entire registration process and everything under the supervision and under the execution of IAESTE A.s.b.l is something I think it's definitely worth to continue. And I somehow would say after the conference is before the conference. And I'm already in touch with countries who are interested in hosting the next conference. Of course, that's a very, very initial stage of discussions, of meetings. But basically, we definitely want to implement the learnings we had during this conference. I think what is interesting for us is we did receive quite some feedback. Most of the feedback was with regard to the online platform. And there it was obvious that because of a change in the tool that was used, that was not as smooth as it was the year before in some of the modules. Some other modules, for example, the general conference module itself, was really working much better than the year before. And I think, again, as it was a hybrid event, that's the main complexity in the entire setting. So I would say the major learning out of this is for organizing an annual conference that's in a hybrid format, you need a team dedicated for the online event. You need a team dedicated for the on-site event. And you need, not saying a team, but one or two people who are coordinating these two teams and make it together as a let's say overall successful event.
Yeah, I mean, what I heard when I was there this year, that people already learned a lot from the online conference, right? So I already heard the feedback that this time, especially in the exchange sessions, some people were not really satisfied with the tool, but we learned and adapted already to switch to Zoom, to switch to Meet, or just use FaceTime for the exchange. And I thought that's quite extraordinary, because 2 years ago or 3 years ago, when we discussed to have not paper at the conference, some people were like, no, that cannot happen, because, when you exchange this paper, then this is a contract. And now this is absolutely no issue anymore. So let's say we can also take this as a kind of positive thing. What we learned out of the crisis with the coronavirus is that we made the leap to the digital world, so to say, and people learned how to adapt and have more experience and not so much fear. Would you say that as well?
Yes, definitely. And I think this example of switching entirely from paper to a full digital solution, I think in almost all the cases it's obvious that you need paper is mainly it's a traditional thing. In very few cases it's really any more legal requirement, because basically all states, all governments realized, well, if people cannot meet or should not meet because of a pandemic, you need to find ways how to do things digital. And of course, there is also for us, I would say, quite some space for improvement to get our digital processes, let's say, I'm not saying fully reliable, but also like in terms of a legal impact, like having a proper digital signature and not just saying, well, I click something and I believe that this is sufficient in legal terms. But definitely, I think that's one of the few things where I would say that the pandemic really triggered here an improvement of an entire process and entire setting. I mean, I'm involved in organizing annual conferences since 2004.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, for a very long time, the amount of paper that was exchanged at an annual conference was not only these 6,000 offers multiplied with, I think in the very beginning when I started, with 5 copies for each country.
Yes.
So like 30,000 pages, or actually more, because the offer is not always only 1 page. But in addition to this, we had all the documents that were ever created in the previous year printed in hard copies, available for each participant. So you can imagine like roughly 70 to 100,000 sheets of paper were printed during the conference.
I can remember something when I think it was the annual conference in Cyprus, which is not too long ago. And it was requested because there, I think the board tried to not print the agenda of the general conference and say, you can find it in the library, it's digital, just download it. And it was requested to get it printed. And I already back then, I was like, and there already started I mean, sustainability and so on was important at that time already. And I also remember that during my time as National Secretary, we removed the visa information as an add-on to the offer what we exchanged, because we said we don't want to print it. You can find it because we had the Exchange platform. At the addition, we have the fields in the Exchange platform, right, where you can upload documents. And we uploaded it there and just said, you cannot imagine how many countries asked us, where is the visa document? Where is it? And I don't know. It said, you find it in the Exchange platform. Everything is up there. If you really want it, I can send it by email, but I'm not going to print it, right?
I think it's what, of course, is also important not to forget. It's not only to say, well, we switch from paper to a full digital solution. I think then the entire environment must be prepared that it's sustaining this process. And I think what we definitely managed during this annual conference, for all physical participants, we could provide an internet access that allowed them to have access to all the documents. So the internet was reliable, it was fast. And in addition to this, each seat in the general conference plus each table for the exchange sessions was equipped with sufficient power outlets and all the necessary, let's say, connections that you need to proper work. And I think when you compare this to let's say conferences 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it's very easy to say, well, we don't provide paper, but then you need to provide all the other things that people can access to documents. And I think at this time we are not where we are now, because simply now the understanding is clearly that everyone is coming with a laptop to a meeting, and typically it's not only a laptop, people have even 2 or 3 electronic devices. So it's a total different way of thinking nowadays.
I remember when we discussed that every time when it's about the internet, we assume in the beginning people assumed like one device, but actually people are arriving at conference and they have a mobile phone, they have a tablet, a laptop, maybe 2, a private one and a working laptop. And so the numbers of devices just increased by, I don't know, exponential function in the end, because now everyone of course understands it after Corona, right? Let's say, but let's stay here and focus on the future, because we now experience the first hybrid version, and I personally believe the hybrid format will stay with us for the next couple of years, because what we saw again is the huge number of people being able to be part of the conference, which was extremely it was just amazing for everyone to be there. And also what I received on feedback, me personally, and I was not really involved, right? But people were texting, it was really nice to meet those people, like 600-700 people. That makes, especially for young volunteers, let's say, a lot of countries have volunteers, it makes it accessible. And that's why I think it stays future. And you mentioned already the future setting, and let's talk a little bit about the future, Thomas, because you now got elected for your second term as the president. Congratulations, which adds another 2 years to your term. And let's talk about it. During the general conference, there's always one point, which is the words of the president, where the president is supposed to address the general conference, the highest decision body, about what he believes, where he or she sees the association, and what the president thinks will happen in the future. And you had a very powerful presentation this year. First of all, there was no presentation. It was just you speaking, and very directly to the members, because the members are the ones in power in the association. And you talked about something about redefining the organization. And please explain me a little bit, or elaborate, what do you mean by redefining, and what will be different, you think, from now to, let's say, in 2 or 5 years in the organization?
Well, I think not saying what will be different in 2 to 5 years. I'm saying what I aim to change in the next 2 to rather 4 years, because we will never know what how our current members are reacting on the proposed changes, and if everyone who should, let's say, carry those changes will be in favor. I think when you follow our process of developing IAESTE since 2005, when we got founded as a registered association in Luxembourg as an ASBL. Unfortunately, it's very obvious that basically from each year to the next year, we have a downwards trend.
Yeah.
And that is a trend that's not triggered by the pandemic. And of course, you can say, well, 2008, 2009 was an economic crisis, and that for sure had an impact on our operations. And then we had the pandemic, and there were several, let's say, regional problems in the past 17 years that, of course, impacted our operations. But I think that is something, if you as an international global organization have a proper setting, should not impact you in a way that you basically totally lose the let's say the role of importance within society. Back in 2005, we had roughly 6,000 students sent each year. That number was continuously going down, and yes, we had some years where it felt like we had stabilized the numbers. But when you really analyze these numbers in detail, you will see, well, we didn't really stabilize the numbers. We just increased the number of members of cooperating institutions, and simply as we increased that number, more parties involved in the entire exchange process contributed to, let's say, stabilizing the number, or let's say reducing the decrease speed. But we simply continued decreasing. And I think with our current structure of how we define membership, how we define a cooperating institution, and in particular membership, that is very much related to how the United Nations are defining membership. And yes, if our members really would be countries, I fully agree that would be the best setting, because that means you have in the end a government in the background who is fully interested, fully supporting the activities, because otherwise they would not be a member of our organization. And you can compare this to a certain extent. You have the United Nations, and then you have other bodies of the United Nations, where suddenly not all UN member states are members of these other bodies, because they identify for themselves whether it's beneficial to be there or it's not beneficial to be there. And of course, there are various reasons for this. They might be political, they might be economical, they might be a mixture of both. In our case, we do have a bit more than 50 full members, and another smaller number of so-called associate members in the organization. What means they should be responsible for, let's say, taking care of an entire country. And only with very few exceptions, our members are capable of doing this.
Yes.
There are a few obvious cases where this is possible. One is when the country is small enough, and simply you do not have a very large geographical spread. And I think here the best examples are basically almost all student-run countries, because simply it's in the interest of the students. They open a so-called local committee at each of the universities that are in the target area of IAESTE internships, and that is, let's say, quite self-sustainable and works well. And I think here we have to be very honest to ourselves. With that limitation, it works well for those committees who are established already for quite some time.
Absolutely.
I think what we witness very, very clearly, all the new, and I would not just link this to let's say student-run committees, all the new committees that are based on a voluntary work, that do not have the necessary support, whether from the university, from a government body, and in particular financial support, or let's say resources in terms of office, of infrastructure. they really are challenged by this situation of, let's say, covering an entire country. And
Yes.
I mean, we have some examples where we really see how challenging it is for voluntary run committees to cover just one university.
Yes.
Especially as the volunteers are changing over the time, and you always need to let's say make sure that these structures are maintained and that you get enough young talent into this setting. And I think when looking to all this, somehow it becomes obvious. If we want to grow again, to have numbers that are having a certain relevance when talking to universities, when talking to governments, when talking to bodies of the United Nations, we simply need to be able to involve more partners in the IAESTE network. And I do not yet have an answer what's the best model to do this, because I'm fully aware increasing just the number of members is not an easy thing. I mean, those people who have ever been at our General Assembly or who have ever witnessed a General Assembly of United Nations or any other large body where you have more than, I would say, 40 people sitting there, allowed to speak, allowed to vote, will realize, well, that's not an easy setting. And I mean, but that's a definition of membership. Member means you are involved in a decision-making process.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, what maybe to comment or to go into depth here on several things you were saying. First of all, was the point about setting up a new committee. We see it, and as especially here, I want to mention one guest for the future of the podcast, because I've already recorded an interview with IAESTE France, which actually now was built up now over the past 4 or 5 years by young volunteers who are now actually really not struggling, but now they got a new office actually, and now they really are searching for new students. And here we have one of the first challenges you mentioned for student-run or volunteer-run countries, to get the new members on board, not to work for the association, because that's work, and I think we should not to downgrading to volunteer. That's work. To run IAESTE in your country is hard work. It requires a lot of dedication, and you don't get paid for it most of the times, right? And the second one, maybe you mentioned about yes, it was very let's say very present at NAFSA conference as an example, which is a huge conference in the US where educational bodies meet and present or get connected. And yes, it was very let's say present over the past year, as long as it was taking place physically or on site in St. Louis or wherever. What was your experience, because you were there, Thomas? What was your experience when you were introducing, let's say, to a country or to a university, as an example, where already an IAESTE member was present? Let's stay in the US. There is Cultural Vistas taking care about IAESTE in the United States, and you met an representative of an university, let's say, not now being in touch with Cultural Vistas regarding IAESTE. What was the major problem for those universities, or what was their major concern? Was it control of their students, control of the, let's say, their students going abroad, or was it something else? Why do some members maybe struggle to get new universities on board?
I think it's not the concern about who is having control of the student. I think the let's say situation is by far more complex. Yeah. I think we have to understand that, first of all, the interest of the university is to contribute to the education of their own students. In particular in the US, when they charge the students quite some money for this education. So they want to make sure that their students get the best opportunities, get the best chances. IAESTE is a program that is not automatically focusing on the best opportunities. We provide opportunities for everyone, but we are in our program, we work with diversity. So we have members from or cooperating institutions from currently 80 countries. So that means with this definition, yes, education systems are different. The quality of internships is different. In some internships, the let's say focus might purely be on the, let's say, working part, and you really can contribute to your let's say education, while in some other internships the focus is more on the experience part, on the discovery part, that you develop yourself as an individual, as a person, and maybe the technical learning during the practical part of the training is not having that importance. So that is definitely, I think, for some universities a layer of complexity, that they are quite narrow in their thinking, and would prefer, well, can we send our students to these 3 countries, but we are not interested in the entire cake, we just want to have a few pieces of it. And
but do you think so we lack of managing those expectations? So what do we lack of understanding what our customers, on the one hand, our customers, so to say, are students who want to go on an internship. On the other hand, we have universities who want to have the best experience for the students, as you said. Are we failing to manage those expectations?
I'm not saying we fail to manage those expectations, but I think it's the way how to explain our quite complex program is not a very straightforward one currently. And then what I wanted to add in addition, I think all the universities are very much interested in sending their students.
Yeah.
Because after you discuss this 15 minutes, half an hour with them, they realize, well, there is an opportunity even when you go to a country where the education system might not be comparable to your own country. Mm-hmm. And especially the United States are having various programs that support exactly that kind of let's say exchange and personal development, which are not at all related to IAESTE because they are run by the US government. But what adds the complexity is receiving students, because that immediately everyone realizes how complex this becomes. You need visas, you need work permits, and in particular in the United States, obtaining a student visa for an internship is not an easy process. Our office in the United States at Cultural Vistas is, of course, very, let's say, experienced in providing all this. But in addition, that is nothing that is offered free of charge. Obtaining a US visa involves certain costs, and I think with this overall setting makes it not very, let's say, straightforward for a university to immediately start a cooperation. And as you pointed out, I mean, whenever I talk to a university interested in becoming part of IAESTE from a country where we already have an existing member, mm-hmm. To be honest, we are not talking that much with the university. We straight guide them to the member, mm-hmm. because it's the responsibility right now of the member to work with that university and make the necessary steps. And I think that illustrates very well how let's say complex our own settings. Because if our member is having, let's say, the necessary resources to deal with a few hundred universities in the country, then they are, of course, very much in favor of taking this opportunity. Yeah. While if you have quite a limited structure in terms of your staffing of your resources, you need to rethink, am I so open simply to work with any university that is interested, or do I just focus on a few universities? And I think that is something what, of course, we have to respect, and that's mm-hmm. why I aim more in that direction, not saying I do not want to exclude anyone from our existing members or cooperating institutions in IAESTE. I just want to open up and to increase the number of partners we can work with. If our existing partners in the countries are willing to let's say, work with new institutions there, well, that's the best thing that can happen. Because also on the global level, our resources are limited, that we onboard the new universities, the new partners. But if a country is telling us, well, we can cover a certain mm-hmm. section, and I make again the mistake of saying country. If a committee tells us, We can cover a certain geographical area of that country. But if you're getting approached by an institution in a total different part of the country, please allow them to work directly with you. Well, why should we not do it? And that, I believe, is the model of the future, because that exactly points in that direction. If we again increase the number of institutions we are working with, we increase the pool of students we can access, and usually the institutions have on their own institutes also job offers. Yes. So it's basically a quite good growth potential in every direction of our stakeholders.
That's a very nice plan, and I think we discussed it over the past years, and now we finally got to the bottom point. And I think let's talk about a little bit how to get there. You know, strategy always is we have this right vision, and you have a vision as the president. Of course, you should have the vision how we want to go. But what I always learned in the past years, when I was also part of the strategy groups, it's nice to have a vision where we should be in 4 years, so to say. But how do we get there? And one point is actually decided now by the General Conference. You're rewriting the statutes and bylaws of the association. And there will be a lot of new changes without me being part of it, but already what we discussed in Vienna. And also what I learned from Laszlo Becker, who was in the association, will be on a future podcast as well. There will be a few changes, and we discuss the membership, but we also I want to discuss now is the decision-making process of the association, because looking through the General Conference minutes, which is accessible to every member and to every cooperating institution, you can read that there is also a, let's say, way forward where we rediscuss how we make our decisions. Because one part, and that was accepted by the General Conference, is we only meet once a year with the highest decision-making body, the General Conference, where the members are in it. We are now finally, and I remember when I discussed that in Cyprus in 2018 or something with several members, and everybody was against it. But again, thanks to, let's say, coronavirus, to see something, we see it works. So let's walk me a little bit about decision-making, because we are aiming to speed that up. Because what we see now, the board at the moment, you're president as part of the board. The board is supposed to administrate the association throughout the year. I think there's also some misconception already in the association, because some people think board is now doing to do the work, but actually the board is there to administrate during the year while the members don't meet. So what do you think about the setting in the future?
Well, I think there is from some people maybe mixing up traditions with let's say legal responsibilities and legal requirements. Mm-hmm. My understanding of being president of IAESTE is a very clear one. I have a mandate from the members that elected myself, as well as the board members do have a mandate as they got elected. Yeah. And it's not only that we are administrating the organizations, we take decisions. And that happens since 2005. That's not my let's say invention in the past 2 years. We are taking decisions. I simply feel like being in the board, being president, also includes a responsibility and the willingness to take decisions, even if they are maybe unpopular, or if they are let's say not backed up by the entire community. I think when you lead any organization, doesn't matter how diverse it is, and IAESTE is a beautiful example of an incredible diverse organization. Mm-hmm. You need to understand you cannot please everyone. Yeah. Of course, you should try to let's say have a compromise where it's possible, not to harm the activities of any of the bodies involved. But I think what we need to do is, in all our way of thinking, we need to put the global organization always first, mm-hmm. and not just think of the interests of national organizations, of local organizations, or even of individuals. Mm-hmm. Because that is let's say, of course, changing the direction. And if I would, as Austrian, let's say, base all my decisions to please IAESTE Austria or to please my former local committee, my decisions would be very much different, or my approaches would be very much different than they are currently are, because I feel responsible for the entire organization.
Maybe, do you think then, I think because I basically agree with you, we worked together for a long time, but the thing is, some country or some members have the let's say their way of working, right? And we always somehow, I don't want to say to fail, but we, as the ASBL, as the global part of the association, we want to invent new things. We want to introduce new things of working. Like, one of the biggest changes, of course, was the exchange platform and the remote internships. And our members sometimes fail to adjust their own systems. How we get them to understand that we need to think about the global body first. As harsh as this sounds, but the global body is the whole association. Without the global body, nobody can do anything, right? How we can we implement that, or the understanding? My first thought was only communication, but we are communicating a lot. I think sometimes we would have need to speak with everyone, let's say on a quarterly basis.
I think whenever we talk about communication, I believe we make one mistake. We think communication is a one-sided thing. So like me sending an email, or the board sending an email, sending our newsletter, sending our meeting minutes, doing this podcast that is available for our community. That's not communication. It's only a half of the communication. We too, in this meeting, we have a communication, we have a dialogue. And exactly. That's why usually I refer, we need to enter a dialogue.
Yeah.
If we would have the resources on the global level, I would aim to have on a quarterly basis a dialogue with each committee involved in IAESTE. Because what our main challenge is, we only assume how our committees are working. We don't know how our committees are working. Yes, I could say, or we in the board could say, we know how our own committee, our home country committee is working. But traditionally, once you make it to the board, you are not working anymore in your own committee. So even if there are changes, you might not be fully aware what changes happened during the past months, years, or in my case, that I was actively involved in IAESTE Austria. That's more than 10 years back. So I'm not saying I know all the ways how IAESTE Austria is doing the work.
I'm just out for 2 years, and I don't want to say that I understand everything they are doing now. So
yeah, exactly. So I think that is very, very obvious. And I mean, I think the approach saying, well, we have some brilliant ideas on the global level, and we assume that our members are implementing them. That doesn't work, because that's the strategic approach we had the past 7 years.
Yeah.
We had a lot of groups discussing stuff. We had SWOT analysis and pestals and all these things that you find in the books you when you learn about strategy at university. But there are two things that you should not forget about this. One is the dialogue with the people.
Yeah.
And the second thing is, it's work. And that doesn't matter if you are a volunteer or if you are employed part-time or full-time for your IAESTE activities. One part is the discussion, but the second part is the work. And this work is usually not very nice. Making changes hurts.
Yeah.
You definitely leave your comfort zone. And that is what I observed, and that definitely was also part of this. We all like to discuss, to have these discussions, have beautiful ideas, but whenever it comes to implementation, you realize, well, we are not having the resources. And what I nowadays put first on the table before we even start the discussion is, think, what resources do you have?
Yeah.
When you have an idea, what resources do you have? What human resources, what manpower, and what financial resources do you have? And if you don't have these resources, you need to include in your strategic discussion a way how to find these resources.
Yeah.
Because otherwise I mean, yes, this artificial number, we put 10,000 internships by 2025. If I have the resources, it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
If I find someone who is saying, well, I sponsor this 10,000 internships or a part of these 10,000 internships with public money, and all the employers do not need to pay a salary, plus the students do not have any travel costs. We have like a travel bursary for each student. It's easy to achieve.
Yeah, absolutely.
Give me $100 million or 100 million euros a year, and 10,000 internships a year are not a big deal. That's very easy to do. With the current setting, what we have, it's impossible.
Yeah,
that is what we clearly could see, not because of the pandemic. The pandemic surfaced all this in a very clear way, but I believe that is where we have to work on.
But talking about resources and talking about communication, because you mentioned we too have a communication. I just did it here on my notebook a little bit. Now at the moment we have 80 countries, and if you want to meet them with every one of them, let's say once every 3 months, so 4 times a year, just for you, that's 80 hours. That's for me, I have a 40 hours contract in Austria at my employer. That's 2 weeks of full-time work. And then I'm not even doing anything else, right? So where are the resources there? We don't have them actually at the moment.
No,
right?
I'm not saying me as president should have these meetings. Don't forget, we have 5 board members.
Yeah, that's my point.
At the moment, 4 support team members. We aim to, if somehow necessary, have an additional person in the support team somewhere during 2022. Exactly for processes like this, to have resources, to have a proper dialogue with our members, because in addition to this, if we want to grow the number of institutions involved in IAESTE, all this requires intense onboarding, intense training, intense coaching. Yeah. I think when you look to our main tool, the Exchange platform, if you are what I would call a power user, someone who is doing a quite large exchange number, who is basically each day spending any time in between 1 to maybe up to 8 hours in this tool. It's not intuitive, but you don't care if it's intuitive or not, because you use the tool. I would compare it with any more complex software. I do not consider Photoshop intuitive. I also do not consider any, let's say, design software like I don't know, Autodesk Inventor or
Maxwell as field approximation software or something like that.
These tools don't have to be fully intuitive, because the people who operate them work with them basically full time. But
exactly,
the large number in our community of users are logging in an hour a week, half an hour a week, not more. And they are overwhelmed with the complexity of the tool. It's not intuitive. So currently, all this requires an incredible amount of coaching and training from our side. We have these Exchange platform trainings, but frankly speaking, we have a lot of online guides. But when you see this and think about yourself, how often do you read a guide? Never. You try.
One reason why we do the podcast is actually exactly this reason. Nobody reads anymore the experience reports, and the idea was born out. We want to bring the experiences of our students into a video format, because people listen to a podcast, or they listen to an audio, or they watch a video, rather than reading 4 pages of PDF document, right? So that's the reason why we are doing this as well.
Exactly. So I believe there are many things that go in parallel. We need to improve our tools in order to, let's say, reduce the enormous amount of coaching and training for people who operate the tools, that they can operate them proper. And I have a strong belief, if the tools, if the methodology, how we are working, becomes more intuitive, becomes more logic, then definitely we can improve as an organization as such. And I mean, don't forget, we talked a bit earlier about the paperless exchange. During the times when we were using papers, and those times are not so long ago, we had colored papers.
Yeah.
When you ask yourself
The pink sheets.
where these colors are coming from, and where these names like N5A, N5B, and all this is coming from.
Yeah.
Do you know where this is coming from?
Me.
Yeah.
For me, it was always, I don't know why they were pink. I have no idea. For me, it was always the pink sheets were, there. You needed them. That was the original, so to say. And for the N5A and B, it was basically, for me, I got explained it like that was the fifth form you needed in the exchange process. That's why that was the number 5 of the programs. And A was the one we received from the receiving country as the acceptance form, and B was basically the confirmation. That's why A and B, and together they were actually N5C. I always loved this part.
So the definition of this was made before the Second World War.
Yeah.
Before the Second World War.
Yeah.
So our founder, James Newby, worked at the Imperial College at the Vocational Work Committee. So he was responsible for finding internships for students from the Imperial College in London.
Mm-hmm.
And in our archives, you find the original papers the Imperial College London was using before the Second World War. And what we started in 1948 was basically, in terms of the process, a one-to-one copy of what the Imperial College did earlier. And basically this entire process, we kept ongoing for almost 75 years. And what we did in our exchange platform was just copy-pasting a paper process to an online tool.
Yeah.
And under the circumstances and under the time frame, we developed together with an external provider the exchange platform. This was understandable, but if you talk to any let's say business consultant who would guide you on how to reshape the process and how to move forward and become fit for digitalization, he would just shake his head and say, "Are you crazy?" I mean, first think what are your parameters you bring to the process, what is the outcome you want to achieve, and then you design a process that is much more slimlined and much more logic and simply does have much less holding points and everything. And I'm fully aware this is a process, this will hurt many people, because that means a few committees will really dramatically have to leave the path that they are familiar with for a long time. On the other hand, a very large number of committees who never understood this complex process and therefore always struggled with it will realize, oh, it can be so simple. And with quite few resources, you can achieve much more in the end.
Yeah, talking about making IAESTE fit for, let's say, 2021 finally, and how do you see your role as the president in this process?
How do I see my role as the president? I think
I have another similar question later on. Just saying.
I mean, I'm not seeing my role as the one who is let's say programming any tools or let's say defining all the details of a process. I'm seeing my role as the one who is challenging everyone to move forward, who is bringing a certain level of industry experience to IAESTE with a background of how to, let's say, implement changes, how to have certain processes set up. And I simply see my role as the one who should be driving the organization forward. And I mean, when I got elected the first term in January 2020, we all did not have a pandemic in mind. And what I did say at this moment was, be sure I will be a demanding president. And then we had the pandemic, and I realized, well, if I would like to stick to that, let's say, level of demanding things and being challenging to people, that would not work in our culture, because our community, including myself to a certain extent, we were all overwhelmed with the pandemic.
Yeah.
And I think for the first year, this was a fair, I'm not saying excuse, but I think we all had to adapt. There was no vaccination in place. nobody knew how things are developing, and then we had all these travel restrictions from governments. And I mean, I'm not expecting from an organization like IAESTE that we are smarter than large governments or United Nations or big corporates who had even more challenging problems than we had. And I think we mastered the first year of the pandemic quite well. But on the contrary, I think it's quite obvious already during last year, and definitely now is the time to wake up and move forward. Accepting the pandemic as an excuse that we cannot operate, we cannot continue, is not working.
I mean, what I remember when I was, because unfortunately the pandemic year was my time in the board as well, and I remember what I said, because let's say I did the math over the past 20 years, and I already also said in my report then, it was nice to have coronavirus or the pandemic as an excuse because we really dropped a lot. But when you do the math, you basically see that we would have dropped anyway. So now accepting or saying the pandemic is an excuse, it's nice, but it's not bringing us forward. And what we always hear are a lot of excuses, to be honest. I'd always somehow, especially when I was in the leadership of IAESTE Austria or later in the board, I heard so many excuses. And I think that's what was one of the biggest mistakes we always made is we always said, okay, you have the excuse about visa regulations, but we never really heard, I have a problem, because the first way to solving a problem is to admitting to have one. And that's what we're always failing to deliver somehow. And now bringing me actually to the last point, or the last section of the podcast, is actually more to talk about you and your role. And we already started a little bit about that, because you once wrote me something in a WhatsApp text message, and you for sure will not remember it, but I remembered and I wrote it down.
In between two Austrians referring to WhatsApp text messages is maybe not a good idea.
Yeah, okay, sorry, I will delete it, of course, properly. And everybody who is a bit confused, we have some, let's say, recent history in our government. But of course, it was nothing about pushing someone into a position. It's not about, but you wrote to me a quote by a general, James Mattis. And you wrote, I don't have worry and stress. I cause worry and stress. Why did you write it? I remember, but why do you think that's because he said that about leadership? And you already got a little bit into it, but please explain me why you chose that quote when it was before the AC. Why do you think it's the right thing to challenge everything to bring the association forward?
I think the correct quote, and I mean it's a bit hard to let's say state the correct quote in that instance is more like, I'm not stressed, I create stress for others. And I'm not comparing myself to General Mattis, who is the former Secretary of Defense of the United States. In particular, as I don't think IAESTE should be, let's say, involved in any military actions or something.
No, not wanted to say that. It's just like stuck with me.
What I like about this sentence in particular is something very simple. As a leader, you need to understand you cannot have any change alone. But you are the one, if you do it alone, who is permanently getting stressed. And I think we all regularly make the mistake, and definitely I'm doing this as well. That we get into some things very much in detail. We find pleasure in doing something. Forget about other compounds of our work, of our responsibility, and suddenly then realize that is creating stress, because you focus on one thing very much and do not anymore have the overall picture. And I think when you come in a position of leadership, you need to work on that skill of keeping the overview and not permanently focus on let's say, tiny bits of the process. You need to involve enough people. You need to engage in enough people who are, let's say, having the focus, and you are the one who is having the wide overview, and that is definitely something what I think, and for that, let's say, any military education might be a good example what you learn in military leadership.
Yeah.
And these are those bits you might be able to take out of this. And I think the past year was somehow really an extraordinary year for, let's say, the leadership in IAESTE. I mean, we got short by one board member. Our head of operations is on a personal leave, and there are, let's say, several things were, let's say, backed up by me as the president, and then you suddenly realize, well, you are instead of having the wide overview, you need to focus on certain things. Maybe you should not focus so much in the end. But on the other hand, and I think that is something what I do hope over the next 2 years we definitely get under control, is we need enough talent, not only in the local committees, not only in the national committees, but we also need this talent on the global level. And I know it's for the past 2 years being involved on the global level was definitely not something people were that much interested, because all these, let's say, nice elements of being involved on the global level, having meetings with our team, getting in touch with our national committees, having physical meetings with them, was not happening. And it was, and I think you experienced this very well about 2 years ago. It was hard work, really hard work for everyone who was involved, and let's say the benefits were definitely not more than the work amount. I think the work was by far more than the benefits we all could get out of it, and you really had to let's say redefine for yourself, what do you see as a benefit? Do you see an online meeting already as motivating enough as benefit? And I do fully understand that this was not easy. So I do hope over the next months and the year we are able again of attracting motivated people in all levels of IAESTE operations, and really free not only me as the president of the global organizations, but all the people who have various leadership positions in IAESTE, that they can have this wide picture on their activities, and do not need to, let's say, step in and troubleshoot and have to focus on very, very detailed activities.
Yeah, I think that really sums it up, and it was on purpose to challenge you a little bit with that quote, because I think that that's the point, that everyone, especially on every level, through every level, you have to also find how can you contribute to the association, because also James Mattis also said, if you're not adding to an organization, you are like a potted plant in the corner of a hotel lobby. You're nice to look at, but you don't add anything to the organization. And I think we have a lot of dedicated people who really want to add something, and everyone needs to find the place and to be active. And I think that's one of the major, let's say, when I sum up our interview now, because we are now going into the end, because it's much longer than I always aim for, but it's really important to have you here to explain your ideas, your vision as the president. That's very important. That's why it's okay to be a little bit longer. You need to be active, to be part. Ask if you want to help. I mean, you want to help me with the podcast, you're very welcome. You want to help the board to achieve something, to do some research on different institutions, just reach out. And the worst thing which can happen, we don't have this as the priority number one at the moment. That's the worst thing which can happen. And you can always, and that counts, of course, to every national committee, to every member as well. So for everyone, maybe not now so deep in the association. Thomas, normally I have always the same question at the end, but you already answered that about a year ago, because it's your second time. So I have a little bit a different question now, and it's a more, let's say, a little bit personal, because you now got re-elected for your second term. And my question, and that will be now the closing statement of you, so to say, is looking back now on your past 2 years as the president and looking also forward now to the next 2 years, what do you think you can do better? Where do you want to be better or different compared to the past 2 years?
I think I was in the past 2 years too patient with let's say moving forward, and I think that is something I need to improve. I think we now I have the feeling in the board, in the support team, it was very important for us to meet in person in Vienna, and I think that definitely generated a lot of motivation also for the new board members who were all in Vienna as well, and for the support team, and I think this motivation we need not only keep within us but really spread to the entire IAESTE community, and let's say drive IAESTE forward, and not just think from one meeting to the next meeting to the next meeting. The work happens in between. Yeah. The meeting is the part where you have a discussion, you have a dialogue, you let's say might make some fine-tuning, you generate motivation, but we need continuously work and move forward. That is the most important thing.
I will cut that out maybe. I don't know. Yeah. But that's the perk. We also are here sitting on Zoom like usual I do on the podcast. We did not manage to meet up. It would have been nice, but maybe another time. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mike.